Good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and this is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. Each week, we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. We also talk about Plum Island. And today, we're going to start off by talking a little about Plum Island because an event happened in my life, the host of this wonderful show. I finished a book on Plum Island, and I think for those of you watching television, excuse me, you can see the cover here. I mention it because it's all local talent to put this together. The picture of Plum Island itself, which you can see at the bottom right, was taken from the Steve Atherton collection. This, of course, is an aerial photo, and I think it shows Plum Island in a significant way. I've lived here a long time, and I haven't seen that many aerial shots of Plum Island. So I think this is instructive. You can see in the north end, you see many houses, and you see the basin, you see houses on the other side of the basin. You can also see the beginning of the South Jetty. Another element that this picture brings out is how much marsh there is around here. Marsh is very important. I think we know that. It helps the fish, it helps the insects, it helps the birds. Hunters are actually allowed to hunt in the marsh at certain times, and many fishermen go in the marsh. So this is a photo from the Steve Atherton collection, which does a lot to explain how the river interacts with Plum Island. That is the river at the bottom. And, when it actually comes out, you'll see more of the marsh and more of the river. And one thing about the river, which boaters tell you all the time, is that, sandbars built up, and you can see a sandbar here. Also in this photo, you can see towards the top of the photo, top right, the beach at the Parker River Wildlife Refuge Center. And the island is about 11 miles long. The refuge center takes up about 7 miles of that. And you can see that it's much larger here than the northern end, but it's very instructive in the sense of you can see how much has been saved, and that's very helpful. In recent years, if you live around here, you know that many very large houses have been built on Plum Island. It started in 2006 in the northern section when water was sent out there, city water got there, and so did city sewage. So rather than having a small shack with a septic tank in your own well, the state said, well, we can't have septic tanks and wells because the septic tank will somehow infiltrate the well and there could be illness. And so starting about 2006, the sewage treatment plant was connected to Plum Island. And so this enabled much larger houses to be built. And if you've been down there recently, you know that they're enormous houses. And, there's always a debate, well, should they be building on the land? My view is that, it's such a beautiful spot. It's so desirable that the building's going to keep going. But that said, if you're watching, but if you're listening, I'll try to be descriptive. So the bottom half of the cover is Plum Island, the river at the bottom, and the Atlantic on top. And then we see three images of wildlife. There's a humpback whale, and if you look closely, they're actually pogies, bait fish being thrown around by the whale. So these bait fish are under great duress here. But that's a wonderful photo taken by Dan Grovac, who lives on Plum Island. He's not a professional photographer, but he certainly could be. We also have in the middle Canada geese. They were very common on Plum Island, or they're very common everywhere, I think, in this area. And, in recent years, they're not a protected species, but they're doing remarkably well. They're all over the place. And even, some golf courses, they get very annoyed with the Canada geese, and they hire shepherds or collies to run around the golf course to chase away the Canada geese. They don't necessarily want the Canada geese dead, but it's the Canada geese do eliminate on golf courses. So these, folks who are walking up and down the fairways do not like to step in evidence of the Canada geese. But anyway, we know they're all over the place. And also here, if you're watching this, that is a snowy owl. That was taken by Dan Grovak also. It's a much larger photo in the book itself, but this was cut down. And isn't that an incredible photo? It's white, it's snowy, it's speckled, and it has the deepest yellow eyes. It's so arresting. So that's a beautiful thing. And that was taken by Dan Grovak also. Dan is a business executive and sales executive for a West Coast company. He does live on Plum Island, and he's also the chair of the Merrimack River Watershed Council. So Dan's a very busy guy. One time recently, I was trying to get a photo from him, and he said, well, try to, I'm in the air now. I'm on my way to Atlanta. Then I'll be in the air. I'll be, on my way to Denver, but I will try to get back to you. So Dan's a busy fellow, a great photographer, as you can see. And he was kind enough to make these available for the book. Now, I'm not trying to sell the book. The book isn't out, won't even be out till late June. But this is, intellectual stimulation, and that is what we're here for. On the back cover, you can see a photo of, or a facsimile of a map of Plum Island. It was created by the Parker River Wildlife Refuge folks. Excuse me. And I thought this would be helpful to people coming into town. Most people don't know much about the refuge. I mean, we can all drive down to Hellcat and back, but this is a map that shows where you can put in a kayak. It shows where you can go fishing. It shows where you can go hunting. And yes, you can go hunting if you have the proper permits in the proper season. So I thought this was a useful element. It also shows the Plum Island Highway and, where Plum Island is in regarding to other parts of the North Shore. So I did that. I thought it'd be interesting, for people to look at. And in the book, there's stories. It's part journalism, part anthology. So I think it's interesting. Another interesting element that took place just in the recent week is the the Merrimack River Watershed Council released its annual report. And most of it's good, but it did note some very troubling elements. Now, those of us who know the river a bit know sometimes it gets dirtier and sometimes it gets cleaner. And the year 2001 was actually a pretty dirty year. It's unfortunate. There were heavy rains. The sewage treatment plant up in Lowell is not doing very well. It's not very effective. But there were enormous CSOs there. And a CSO is a combined sewage overflow. And what that means is many of the sewage treatment plants upriver were built at a time when the sewage went into the treatment plant, but the pipes that took the runoff from the rain also went into the sewage treatment plant. On a day in the spring or summer or whatever, that's okay. But when there are heavy rains coming quickly, the sewage plant gets overtaken with too much liquid, and the whole thing is discharged into the river. So you're getting raw sewage going into the river. Now, obviously, any of us would say, well, why do you discharge this effluent? But the fact is, if you don't discharge the effluent, then the pipes would back up and people would be getting effluent in their own homes. The businesses that count on it would be getting sewage in their businesses. And so it must be discharged. But that's one thing that I thought that we were kind of getting a hold of that, but that doesn't seem to be true. So this summer, and this is another new element from the Watershed Council's recent periodic report, they're moving forward with trying to create a system that would tell people who use the river when a discharge has taken place. And so, you know, people don't go too much swimming in the river, although there are some, but there's certainly a lot of people who go boating in the river. Their dogs go into the river. They do a lot of fishing in the river. And the feeling is, well, if you've had a huge discharge up in Lowell, then, you know, a day or two later, there's going to be effluent flowing down into Newburyport. And that's what legislators are trying to do. I might say that Newburyport is not a part of this problem. Now, this podcast goes mostly to Newburyport. So I do have to reiterate that our sewage treatment plant is up to date. It does not put out, it is not prone to CSOs. It does not, you know, put any effluent in the water. So when we're talking about these CSOs, we're talking about Manchester, Lawrence, Lowell, Haverhill, and some of those communities. This is known. I mean, the environmental protection agencies know this, but they are not acting. Well, they are acting on it, but it just takes time to build and to improve a plant. In Manchester, New Hampshire, for instance, they just announced a $130 million program to improve their sewage treatment plant. And that'll take 20 years. But you can see there's a lot of planning and a lot of everything that goes on. And one reason we talk about sewage treatment is not just because of recreation, which is a tremendous industry and a tremendous asset to this area, but because of drinking water. More than 500,000 people still get their drinking water from the Merrimack River. Again, this does not include Newburyport, Salisbury, or Amesbury, but those upriver in Lawrence, particularly parts of North Andover, parts of Haverhill, and Lowell still get their drinking water from the river. Now, you know, science has arrived. We all assume that drinking water is very clean, but I guess that's the biggest surprise that I've come across since I've been researching the Merrimack River for the past 5 or 6 years, is that 500,000 people still get their drinking water from the Merrimack River. So this is Dyke Hendrickson. The podcast is Life Along the Merrimack. This is on 96.3 FM Joppa Radio and Channel 9 local TV, and it's also archived on YouTube. So we talk about the river frequently. Excuse me. And there is a little help on the way. You may have, several $billion has been earmarked for Massachusetts for different projects. This is from federal money. You may have read about it, the $1 trillion omnibus spending bill. And so it's possible that some of this money will come to those sewage treatment plants, because in the end of the day, a lot of these communities, and I'm thinking the ones Lowell and Lawrence, don't have a lot of extra money to improve their sewage treatment plants. So if they could get federal money for this, that would be a great thing. And that seems to be happening. Lori Trahan, who is a congressional representative from the Lowell area, has been working on this. And it appears that some of this money might be coming in this direction. I don't know that to be true, but it is a possibility, and we could certainly use it, because there are a great many boats on the river every summer. There's 1,500 on the Newburyport side alone. Cashman Park has hundreds more a week. And so we know that this is a regional center for boating, for fishing, for a lot of things that involved outdoor life. Talking about fishing, I was up in Maine recently, and I'm following this unusual situation with lobstermen, and there are still lobstermen in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. Excuse me. But in Maine, the federal government, the feds, are trying to save the right whale from danger and or death. Now, there aren't many right whales in the North Atlantic, perhaps 380. And according to lobstermen and the congressional delegation in Maine, there's been no evidence of death of a right whale in Maine waters. Now, what the feds are saying is these lobster traps, of course, they have the buoy on the surface and they have the trap maybe 40 feet down, and the whale can run into the line and get caught or get injured or somehow, have a dermatology problem. So they are really pushing the lobstermen to change their way of lobstering. And so one of the ways, and I'm still trying to figure this out in my limited mental resources, is they want to have lobstering with no lines. Okay, so if you have no lines, then the right whale is not going to get caught in the line. On the other hand, as the lobstermen say, how are we going to know where our traps are? How are we going to know when the traps are full? This is going on. I'm not making this up. And so one of the experimental traps, which is actually being made in Massachusetts, is so the lobsterman fills this, lobster trap up with bait, drops it over the side. It has like a GPS kind of transistor in it. So there's no line that goes down with it per se. It just goes down 30 feet and it sits there happily. Now, the way it's supposed to work is when it gets full up with lobsters, this GPS/transistor will make a signal to the lobsterman up on the surface. The lobsterman will say, my pot is full. I will bring this to the top. So the lobsterman hits the little button, which fills up a buoy and fills up a large balloon, which comes to the top. And so the lobsterman can see where his trap is, and B, inside the lobster trap, supposedly you have these inflating devices as well that will bring the lobster trap to the top. So I don't know if we lived in Maine for 10 or 15 years, and lobstermen are kind of, old salts, if you will. So I was reading some of the comments of, these guys and saying so lobstermen do not really want to do this because it'll take an enormous amount more gear. Someone estimated $70,000 per lobsterman if you have, say, 300 traps. And they have to learn this whole mechanism about the transistor. They have to get new IT on their lobster boat so they can push a button and find out when the lobster trap is full, and also, how to get the lobsters out. So these lobstermen are so droll, and they're saying, "Are you kidding me?" I mean, some people in offices of Washington are saying we've got to change the whole industry. And again, I point out that there are very few, if any, examples on record of a right whale getting killed or even injured. I'll just say getting killed in lobster gear. And the source on this one is the Maine delegation. That would include Senator Susan Collins, Angus King, and Representatives Jared Cohen and Shelley Pingree. And they also threw in Governor Janet Mills. They had a press conference not long ago and said, let's slow down on trying to make new rules for the lobstermen. There is no evidence that the rope from the lobster, from the buoy to lobster trap 30 feet below, there's no evidence of it. There are no dead right whales. You're creating a situation on a worst case scenario based on some scratches that, took place in 2004 and 2006 in the Gulf of Maine. But you have no proof that this is a dire situation. So anyway, I'm not laughing. I just mention it because it's an difficult situation for lobstermen. I mean, think of your own business. If you have a business or your family's business, if you had to suddenly come up with $70,000 of new gear, you don't know how to use it, you don't know if it'll work, and you're just trying to make a living as a lobsterman. There's another unusual situation up in Maine, and I say it because it relates to Massachusetts as well. Maine is, becoming a leader in trying to get wind farms out on the ocean. And so that would mean you put in large windmills like we have one down at the industrial park, not like that, but you know what I mean. They'd plant these windmills in shallow water. The mills would turn and turn, they generate electricity, and Maine theoretically would have more electricity and less based on fossil fuel. And Massachusetts wants to do that also. Massachusetts is trying very hard to figure out a way that they don't have to use so much fossil fuels. I mean, this is an earnest effort. But, some of the lobstermen at that time, and really people all over Maine, if you live in a town or you have a place on the beach, and the same thing could happen in Massachusetts, they're saying, well, they have lights and they turn all the time. And is this going to be, our wonderful ocean, of Moby Dick and everybody else, the old mariner in the sea? If we have lights popping at night, we have turbines going around, we have Canada geese and eiders getting whacked. I mean, I know I'm being a little dramatic here. It just seems like such a change. And the lobstermen and fishermen feel that, once the feds get in there, or even the state folks are going to say, well, it's going to be, you can't come within 1,000 yards from, this turbine, or you can't, drop lobster traps, near this particular edifice. So I think that's a curious thing that they're facing. And Massachusetts faces it also because state officials in this state are figuring out, well, could it be done? Now, on the North Shore, things have changed on Plum Island. Not on Plum Island itself. There are no wind towers on Plum Island, but there certainly are, as you look towards Gloucester and Ipswich, there are 5 or 6, and it's certainly much different than it used to be. And I kind of think, I'm not offended by them. Perhaps I should be, but I'm not. I mean, I'm sitting there happily in Plum Island. I look over, there's some, 5 to 10 miles away, there's these lazily turning windmills, and they're generating power. So I think if that's part of the situation that we have to use for fossil fuels, I can see that. Just putting out many wind farms, off of Massachusetts or off of Maine. I mean, maybe that is brave new world. I don't know. It's a situation that they're still studying, but, once the feds get involved, things can move fast. Also, the Governor Janet Mills, is very much pushing wind power on the ocean. And she did step back a bit, and she's, excuse me, she said nothing can be done, within 3 miles of the coast, and that's a good thing. But I think these are some issues that different places are working with. And another one, this is the final one, because I see we're running out of time, on Life Along the Merrimack with Dyke Hendrickson on Joppa Radio, 96.3, and Channel 9 local TV, as well as YouTube, is so Maine is having numerous problems figuring out, they have many organizations trying to save the ocean and the seaside, as we do in Massachusetts. And one suggestion is to have a czar, because they have like 50 people who are very well appointed and well educated, but you don't have one person watching out for the ocean, the estuaries, and the rivers. And I think about that when I think about the Merrimack River. Everyone wants the Merrimack River cleaner, and much has happened in recent years to make it cleaner. But, you know, you have CSOs, like we talked about moments ago. You have forever chemicals. This is another thing to report. The Watershed Council report found that several companies up in New Hampshire, you know, are making forever chemicals. And if they go into the Merrimack River, they don't come out for 100 years or more, and they can be damaging to drinking water. So that's what I think about. And I were a journalist, which I'm not. I was for 4 decades. But I would write a column about, how about a czar for the Merrimack River? How about one person to be able to stand out there and say, you know, we've got to do better with the drinking water. We've got to, you know, clean up in the areas so we don't get gasoline and oil when boats are filling up. We've got to make sure that we don't have houses built too close to the river. I mean, there's numerous things that are going wrong at all times, but we don't have one person to look over it. And it reminds me in a way, a much smaller way, I quickly point out, but you might remember the Olympics many years ago, and Mitt Romney was a native of Utah, and the Olympics in Utah were not going well. And Mitt Romney was named to be the czar of the Winter Olympics. Now, he served as our governor. He's now serving as their senator. But I think of that, one person came in to work the Olympics, to straighten it out, to make rules, you know, to be the, you know, the buck stops here. And I wonder if that wouldn't be good for the Merrimack River. You know, there's dozens of communities tied to it, hundreds, if not hundreds of industries, thousands of boats, tens of thousands of fishermen. There are many, many people who enjoy the Merrimack River. Perhaps if we had a czar of the Merrimack River to, you know, to watch over river traffic, river cleanliness, planning for storm surge, planning for higher water, making sure we don't get too much building on the dunes, that type of thing. Maybe that would be good. Well, anyway, that's my rather wild idea. I want to say it's my brief and spectacular moment, as I do on PBS, but that's a little off the rails, I've got to say. But perhaps someday a czar of the Merrimack River will be chosen and will have a lot of authority. So that's it. This is Life Along the Merrimack. I'm Dyke Hendrickson, former journalist here in the area. I've written a number of books, including the one on Plum Island, which I'm not permitted to talk about, and pontificator on things about the river, such as should there be a czar on the river. I enjoyed talking with you. I hope we can all be enlightened about the Merrimack and Plum Island, and we'll see each other next week. Again, Life Along the Merrimack. This is Dyke Hendrickson. Thank you for being with us.